in eating disorder recovery. Really what this means is we're going to look at the communication model, specifically the one we use here at BridgePoint, that is a model developed at the Haven, which is a personal development center on Gabriola Island on the West Coast. The hope is that by finding your voice in eating disorder recovery, it will mean you no longer have your body speaking for you. Using effective communication allows you to be in relationship with yourself and with one another, and you get to learn more about yourself and others that you are interacting with. Viktor Frankl has this great reminder for all of us. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. So step number one, we have to breathe. Often this is the first thing that we forget to do, whether it is because we're in an uncomfortable situation, we have some emotions coming up, we have a story that we've told ourselves or other people have told us to believe that has our nervous system on high alert or even medium alert, and we forget to breathe, or we breathe very shallow. The breath, when we slow down enough to be present in the moment, and we are paying attention, again, without judgment, that is where we will make space using breath. In that space, like Viktor Frankl has proposed, that's where the new possibilities lie in how we receive and how we send information, which really is communication. This is the master picture of the communication model from the Haven. The elements of the communication process are mixed together, although this diagram describes these phenomena as if they occur in a linear, sequential fashion. I want you to remember that they can just as easily appear randomly or even simultaneously. We're going to break this down and dig deeper, looking at each of these components. So the first piece that we have to remember is context. So I'm just going to flip back here. Remember, context is what we bring with us. We all have context, and we bring it with us into relationships. There's two types, historical or immediate. Historical is those things that we've experienced early in life, maybe as a child, that have shaped the way you think, feel, see, behave. Immediate, just as it says, is something that's happened really recently. So for example, you might have had a fight with your partner last night, or maybe your car broke down, or there was some kind of a medical emergency last night. As you go into the communication model, you are bringing all of that with you. We don't want to get stuck in the context, but it does help us create understanding, okay? Looking at the past only means we can understand more clearly what and who we are. That's going to help us move more wisely into the future in terms of building what and communicating what we want to communicate. I'm going to keep referring back to this model. We're going to start at the top, the circle with perception. So perception is using our five senses. This is taking in what we see, what we hear, what we smell, touch, and taste. Every moment, we are taking information in through all our senses. Sometimes we become disconnected from some of our senses. And we privilege certain senses over others. So we decide, consciously or unconsciously, that what we see or what we hear will have heavier weight, will play more importance to us than maybe a smell, a touch, or a taste. Or perhaps touch becomes the significant sense that we are tuning into and attuned to. So what we feel against our skin, the way other people touch us. What we want to do is become attuned to all our senses. So every day, every moment of the day, we are having thousands of items of basically data come to us. And in themselves, these have no meaning at all until we interpret. So this is the next circle, moving around clockwise on that diagram. So the interpretation is about meaning, creating meaning. So oftentimes you're going to hear yourself say or think, I believe, I think, I assume, I am interpreting, I imagine, I judge, I speculate. Remember, this is not a feeling, okay? So feelings are one word. I feel jealous. I feel scared. I feel hopeless. The thoughts and the meaning is going to be a much bigger sentence. It's going to be, I feel hopeless because I believe I can't change. There's something wrong with me. I feel sad because the story I'm telling myself is that you don't love me anymore, or that I'm not lovable, okay? So all that data that we're taking in throughout the day, thousands and thousands of pieces, it's just data until we put meaning to it. And the meaning is where we make sense of the information. Based on our interpretations, we experience body feelings, which are broadly either positive or negative. I prefer comfortable or uncomfortable. You've probably all experienced how profoundly and subtly your unchecked interpretations, so these are the ones that we just take as truth without checking them out, that these unchecked interpretations of the things we perceive about another person dictate the course of our relationship. So based on our meaning and our interpretations, it changes the way we interact and the stories we create about somebody else. And the stories can be addictive, especially if they support the story that's going to keep us safe. Because one of the things we talk about at BridgePoint is that reptilian part of the brain, lizard brain, that's primary goal is to keep us safe. So it is always scanning the environment, looking for what's good, what's bad, what's safe, what's unsafe, because it wants to make sense of the world. So it wants to create story, because story, if there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and if there's the possibility of predicting, then that's going to be safer for us as a being. Okay, so they can become really addictive. You might have heard me use the sentence, the story I'm telling myself. That is a really nice sentence starter to remind us and let other people know that it is a story. and that it's not truth, it's not fact, it's one story. And there's the possibility of other stories as well. Really important during this process also, we're not looking for who's right, who's wrong, okay? We're just gathering information and then paying attention to the meaning that we give it. Moving around the circle on the model, we move to feelings. So when we've taken in with all our senses, and then we've created meaning, we have a feeling. And usually we're going to want to move towards that person. We have more open, warm, attracted feelings, or we want to move away. We feel closed, cold. Something is pushing us away. Now remember, when we choose emotions, we want to choose which emotions we can feel. Unfortunately, we can't. If we try and numb emotions, we're going to numb all emotions. So we get the comfortable and the uncomfortable. This is probably the most important part of this model. Ask, listen, and share. So we've moved into the middle. I'll just go back here so we can take a look and be reminded of where we started and where we are right now. We started with perception. We took in all the data. We interpreted it, so we gave meaning to it, whether it's correct or not right now. We experienced some feelings, and this is all within the context that we brought with us. Now we move into the middle. We want to ask, listen, and share. Check with the other person. This is about building the bridge. This is why I love this communication model, because, as most of you know, our name is BridgePoint. We're a bridge. So we're building the bridge. And we might find that our thoughts and feelings change. The key is to check our interpretations with the other person. If we don't, so if we decide to go strictly with the data, the meaning, and the feelings that we have, we will miss out on getting to know and understanding the important people in our lives, okay, and on learning about ourselves and how we see the world. By learning to check out our interpretations, and again, without getting caught up in arguments about who's right, who's wrong, this lets us take a huge step in understanding and expressing ourselves, because ultimately, the goal of communication is to express ourselves in hopes of being heard, being understood, feeling like we belong, and possibly meeting a need. This process of checking it out with other people also helps us expand our world to include others' realities. You can have two people experience the same situation or witness the same event, and you will have two very different experiences and two very different descriptions. This process of asking and listening and sharing will also be better. It'll equip us to be better able to accept and express our thoughts and feelings and understand those of others without letting them dictate how we live. So we can't move on to the next two steps in the model, which are formulating our intentions and taking action, unless we've done this piece of checking it out with the other person. Notice, up until now, this has all been an internal experience. So until we got to this place of asking and listening and sharing with the other person, this was all going on inside of you. This piece is where we say, hey, when I see blank, or when I heard this phrase, the story I told myself was, that I was being judged less than. And that left me feeling really frustrated. And now I want to check it out with you. Because what we heard, what we interpreted, may not be what the other person was trying to communicate as well, or what they were trying to convey. So this is where we bring the other person in. Now we can move to intentions. So the goal of using this communication model is so that we can formulate our intentions more clearly and take actions that are congruent, so they align themselves with our actions, are in line with our values, so that our actions are self-responsible, so we're accountable for them and we know why we're doing them and why we've chosen them. And also, there is a level of sensitivity for others. So the intention piece, what I intend to do, what I want to do, or what I won't do. You may not be able to control everything or everyone. Well, you may not. You will not. What do we have control over? We only have control over ourselves. And this is one of the riskiest pieces of, I think, being in this world right now, being in relationship, being us, because literally we only have control of ourselves. And it is a really vulnerable process to interact with a world and people where we actually don't know what the outcome is going to be. Remember, one of the pieces we talk about at BridgePoint, and this comes from Brene Brown's research. Any of you that know me know I was going to talk about Brene Brown again tonight because I love her. But Brene Brown in her research talks about vulnerability, and there's 3 key pieces to vulnerability. You know you're in a vulnerable process when there's risk involved, when it feels like you're emotionally exposing yourself, and there's uncertainty. So, wow, that kind of sums up this communication process, hey? So we don't have control over anything but ourselves. But we can take charge of ourselves, our responses, our reactions, and the reality. And by reality, in terms of what we decide to create, that's the story that we create for ourselves. I often use this example of falling down the stairs in my house. And I fell down a set of stairs 4 times over a course of 4 years. And my reality, the story I told myself, was that I am not capable of doing stairs. I very quickly changed the way I walk up and down stairs. And yet there was another story, another reality for me, that I had walked up and down those stairs hundreds of times and nothing happened. I did it quite successfully. So the stories that we create shape our experiences in this life. And then action. What do I actually do? So how do I want to move forward now that I have this data? I put some meaning to it. I had some feelings, and then I checked it out. And maybe all of that was accurate. Maybe I learned something new that I needed to shift the meaning, which left me feeling something different. With all of that, then what do I want to do or not do? And then how do I put that into place? Now remember at the beginning when I said that it looks really nice and linear and we just go through the circle and it's nice and clean. Well, not quite, because then we have to remember that the other person, actually every single person, whether we're interacting with them or not, is doing this exact same process. So they have their context and they are being inundated with data, what they see, what they smell, what they taste, what they hear, what they touch. And then they are creating meaning out of that. They're interpreting. And then they're having feelings. We have to be aware that each of us is constantly creating our own experience through the way we take in data, through our senses, interpret the data, and then generate an internal response. Decide what we want to do, intention, and then act. Here are 3 tips as you're going through this process. 1, pause, and this is where I remind people, breathe. And when we talk about breathing, I had a really nice experience where a yoga instructor suggested, instead of focusing on, a lot of times when people say belly breathe and deep breathe, they're talking about put your hands on your belly and watch it rise and fall. For some people, the stomach area can be a real sensitive area. There can be a lot of meaning attached to it. Depending on how you're breathing, you can actually make your stomach move and still be doing quite shallow breathing. So this yoga instructor recommended I either visualize and or actually put my hands on my ribs and think about my ribs expanding and then letting them go, and they'll contract. And then have them expand as you breathe in and then release. So pause and breathe. Figure out why you want to speak to this person, okay? When you know this, everything else will be guided by this focus. So if you go in saying, I want an apology, how likely is that? Because we don't have control over that other person. They may not apologize. If I go in wanting to better understand, there's a likelihood that could happen. If I want to share, there's a likelihood that could happen. So get really clear on why you want to speak to the person. Number 2, say why. So when you say, hey, I'm wondering if we could talk. Do you have a couple minutes? Say why. Get clear. Be closer and make this decision with your input. So I want to, hey, you know what? Do you have a moment to talk? I'd really like to check something out with you. Our relationship is really important to me. I want to make this decision with your input. I'm having a hard time understanding what you're trying to share with me, and I really want to get this clear. Okay, all those are examples of letting that person know why. Because oftentimes, without the why, what happens? That person is going to go into hearing you say, again, we go back to this communication model. So they're going to take in the data. She says she wants to talk to me. I've come with this context of when people usually say that, that means I'm in trouble. So because I always got in trouble from the teacher at school, or, you know, my parents used to say that before they got really mad at me and they yelled. So I come bringing all of that. I hear you saying you want to talk to me. And then I interpret, I give meaning to it. I'm in trouble, I've done something wrong, they don't like me. We go into the storytelling that then creates a feeling, panic, anxiety, the desire to run away, fight, or freeze, not fleas, freeze. Okay, so if we can say why, hopefully will help us be very clear on why we want to do this, and also help that other person keep their defenses down. The other key piece in this process is to use short sentences and everyday words. Oh my goodness. Have you ever talked with somebody and they are using really big words and they sound really smart, but you don't understand a word they're saying? So use everyday words, short sentences. Remember, people hear generally the first 16 seconds best. This is not a monologue. This is not, you know, a short novel even. And we want to keep it timely. And so we're not talking about things that happened 2 years ago, 3 years ago, possibly even 6 months ago. It depends on the situation, what you're communicating. But we need to keep it really timely. We can't bring up all the past. Okay. So I want to stop here and just ask if there's any questions or any comments. I saw someone had their hand up earlier, but I don't see it now. If you have a Q&A, if you want to put it in the Q&A section. Does someone have their own experience of using this model? Did it work? Did it not work? I'm going to move back up into the master model. Did you ever have a time when you tried to use this model and it didn't work out so well? So someone says, I have used this model with success. Great. Wow. What do you think made the difference? Was it tone of voice? It is very scary to enter into it. Oh, I think everyone here would agree with that. It's a real vulnerable process. Tone of voice for sure, yes. We can use all of our body. So remember, we want, if you go into this process with your arms crossed over your chest, your body's turned inwards, your brow is furrowed, your voice is loud and maybe deeper, that's going to be received in a certain way. when we can soften our voice, unfurrow our brow, maybe open the chest, open the body language so people feel more that you're more approachable, right? Especially when we're working with little ones. If you're using this with a child, really, well, and I would say with anybody, be at eye level. Have you ever had anyone stand over you and try and communicate? It doesn't leave a good feeling. So if we can be at eye level, so if one person's sitting, the other person sits down. Someone just said, when another person brings up more distant past, how would one turn it back to the present tactfully? What a great question. Because there are those that want to bring up every single event that's ever happened. Sometimes it's in an attempt to support their story. Look at all the evidence. I would get really curious about, depending on who this person is, what might drive them to do that? Sometimes if people aren't feeling heard, they will start, well, it almost feels like people are throwing at you every single thing they can think of. There's a really nice technique. So if someone is throwing a lot of, and maybe they're getting more escalated and they're saying, and last year when you did this and we went on the holiday and you ended up, and they're pointing fingers and conversation has kind of gone sideways. First and foremost, remember to breathe. Slow things down and say, yeah, you're right. That would be really frustrating. We want to validate. No wonder you're angry. You've been holding on to this for a year. We're not saying the person is right or wrong. We're not trying to defend. We are saying, hey, I hear you. That I can only imagine how frustrating that would be. And then if you can add a because, so no wonder you're bringing this up, because you felt, I can imagine you feel like I haven't been hearing what you've been trying to say, because we haven't always agreed on things. Because, so if you can add 3 becauses, awesome. This takes a bit of work to, it's kind of trying to put yourself in their shoes and say, whether it's accurate or not accurate, yeah, I can see why you'd feel that way, because, I wasn't present as much as you might have felt you needed me. Or I love when people say, don't try and use that communication model on me. Don't try and BridgePoint me. Yeah, so you can say, you're right. That would be really frustrating, because this isn't the way I usually talk, and because this isn't what our conversations have looked like in the past. And going back to the why, and I really want to have a different kind of conversation because this relationship means something to me. Someone said, I have attempted to use this numerous times and it works well. Sometimes I don't get the result I want, but at least I have an answer and have to move on from there. What happens when emotions get in the way of communicating and it goes south. How do you bring it back on track? What do we do when there are many family members involved? Oh, goodness. Okay, so I'm glad to hear, yes, the piece is we don't have control over the outcome. And so if we can focus on doing the best we can to go in with the right intention, why we want to have this conversation, taking it slowly, breathing, keeping it in the present moment. If it gets off track, it's okay to say, this really isn't going the way I wanted it to. Or if someone's getting really upset, you know, I can see how much this is upsetting you. Is this the right time to talk? We can't always assume that when we want to have a conversation that everyone else is ready to have a conversation. So do we need to ask, hey, is now a good time? And if they say no, when would be? They could ultimately say, I don't want to talk. We have no control over that. We can still let them know why, because maybe the defenses are still up. So we can say, oh, okay, my hope in having this conversation was so that I could better understand what you were trying to tell me earlier, because I don't think I understood it, and I really want to be clear, or I really want to have a conversation because I want us to make this decision together, so that we both feel we had a say. What to do when there are many family members involved? Who is this conversation? The difficulty with family is sometimes lots of family get involved in conversations that aren't theirs to have. We want to have a say because we love them. And we don't like when they're upset or when there's conflict or distress. And so we want to give advice. We want to chime in. Oftentimes, using this communication model will be about setting boundaries and saying, hey, my partner and we're going to be figuring this out. And, recognizing, hey, I know you love us, and I know this is really difficult for you to see. We have to decide, who is this communication, this conversation really about, and who does it involve? It is not helpful if we're having conversations about people that aren't in the room. So if this conversation is about mom or your partner, hopefully you'll be able to have that conversation with that person directly. If you can't, I would really encourage you to find a marble jar person, someone that's earned the right to hear your story, or your counselor, that you can brainstorm and even role play what the conversation is you want to have with them, how you want that communication to go. I'll encourage people to actually write it out. And I've had people go to the other person and say, hey, I really want to communicate this, but I know sometimes emotions can get the best of me, or I really want to make sure I say this right, or that I'm clear, and so I wrote this down, so I'm going to read this. You still have to go back and check it out with the other person, though, right? Does that make sense? I hope those answers are helpful. This is, the model looks beautiful. It's really nice and clean. And it's got these nice little circles that are all like tidy. And then you get in it, and it can get messy. And so the other piece about being human is we're not going to do it right all the time. And it's okay to circle back and say, wow, that did not go the way I wanted it to go. I think you were trying to tell me something and I wasn't in a place to hear it, or I didn't respond the way I wanted to. I want to circle back. Can we talk about that some more? Because we're going to be human. We're not always going to show up ready to use this communication model in all its glory, because we've got our own stuff going on. So give yourself permission to mess it up. As long as we're doing something different, we're going to get a different outcome. So even if it doesn't go quite as planned, it's different. And at BridgePoint, we talk a lot about a 1 degree change, 1% shift that can create big change over time. But in the moment, it feels really, really small and almost inconsequential. Start small. If you need to, circle back. And you'll see things shift. Now, I do want to come down here and ask you all a question. How do you communicate with yourself? So as much as we communicate with each other, we also communicate with ourselves. Communication scholars call this intrapersonal communication. So take some time to get curious. And again, this is without judgment. Get curious and then examine your thought patterns. What kind of words do you say to yourself? What stories are you telling? Our minds will chatter. That is guaranteed. I think it was Pema Chodron, who is a monk, used to call it monkey mind because, you know, our brain kind of swings from tree to tree, from idea to idea. So the mind will chatter, but we don't have to believe the thoughts. Because becoming aware of those thoughts and words that are beneficial, that feed us, that nourish us, that are part of our healthy voice, not the eating disorder voice, not the inner critic or the drill sergeant or that guidance counselor or coach or parent who put you down when you were young. Find those thoughts and words that are beneficial and feed you. At BridgePoint, we talk a lot about self-compassion. It's talking to yourself like you would a good friend. Are you doing that? Some ideas on what might help is practice talking to yourself in the third person. This helps us zoom out a little bit. So when we're really beating up on ourselves, if we can zoom out and say, wow, Lauralyn, what is going on? Lauralyn is really struggling right now. Or Lauralyn really wants to try and get this piece of information, share this idea or this thought. Sounds a little silly at first, but it can help just take us that one step removed and back. You could give your inner critic a voice or a name. We also need to practice communicating gratitude, and that starts within us. So how do you communicate with yourself? And are you communicating in a way that is generous, that is trusting, that is optimistic, that leaves things open to possibilities? I don't know if I'm going to say this right. Lao Tzu? The saying is, watch your thoughts because they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions because they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. And watch your character, it becomes our destiny. So communication is key when we think about the recovery journey, finding our voice and moving ourselves into that life that's worth living, that we want to be living. Any questions? We've got 10 minutes, and I want to open it up more. I really want to encourage you to go out, experiment, mess it up. Remember, one of BridgePoint's sayings, and I think this actually came from Brene Brown as well, the magic is in the mess. Get messy. It's a vulnerable, scary process, and courage is contagious. So when we step into the courage and we say, hey, I want to have a different kind of conversation, more times than not, other people will see that and say and feel, I want that too. Okay, let's do this. Scares the heck out of us, but let's do this. And we're going to mess it up. We're going to have to circle back. And in that process, we're going to learn more about ourselves. We're going to learn more about each other and actually build connection. Any last questions or comments? Someone says, I usually talk badly to myself. Boo, hiss. I don't know where we came up with this idea that if we beat ourselves up enough, that will motivate us or somehow help us do different. Because it doesn't. And this has been supported with the research as well. It doesn't help with motivation. It doesn't help with people feeling like they can make change, that they want to make change. I think I brought it forward in our webinar on recovery. You know, there's that saying, fake it till you make it. And I don't know how much I believe in that as I do in terms of face it till you make it. So face yourself with kindness. Face yourself with words of inspiration, curiosity, loving kindness, compassion. And then that's going to create change. Someone else said, I forget the communication model and need to be reminded. Thank you. Yeah, you know what? And I don't know who else out there. I know for myself, when I am in a situation where, you know, my emotions are escalated, my thoughts have kind of gone into a tailspin or a whirlwind, tornado, I also lose sight of my tools. And so the other piece I would really encourage you to do is start practicing this, okay, not on the biggest, scariest topic that has been the contentious issue for years. Don't start there, please. Start with something small. okay? And then build, get success, mess it up, go back, practice. With any of the tools that we teach at BridgePoint, one of the key pieces is not to wait until you're in the distress to try and use it. Well, especially for the first time or second time. We want to be practicing these tools when things are going fine. Actually, even when they're going great. So we can use this communication tool not only for when there's something that's not going well and we want to communicate that. We can also communicate, think about using this with a loved one or a friend and saying, you know, okay, I see this event that's happening or this behavior that's going on this trip, and the meaning, you know, it just means so much to me because we're spending time together and we're not on our phones, and I'm getting to know people in a different way, and that leaves me feeling just so much joy. You know, we check it out with the other person. What's your experience of this? Are you enjoying it? Like, what are you seeing and feeling? And then my intention, maybe it's, wow, I want to do more of this. Action, let's plan our next holiday. Let's plan another coffee, another get-together, another check-in, whatever it might be. So it doesn't have to be all around difficult topics per se. It will still feel uncomfortable to use this model, but we can use it in so many different ways. So practice, 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 and practice even when things seem to be going okay, because that's where we're going to build confidence and really get the tools in our bones. Someone else said, I think it came about for me thinking it wouldn't hurt as badly when others put me down. Yeah, that idea that if I can put myself down first, it won't. So if I'm communicating to myself in a way that is degrading, distasteful, demeaning, if I do that, then somehow that's going to hurt less than if someone else does it, or when someone else does it. And the reality is, it hurts just as much. Those words hold just as much power, whether they are said from somebody else or from ourselves. Any other questions or comments? Oh, how do you know when you are in the right mindset for the communication model? It's a really good question. How do you know when you're in the right mindset? Well, I think going back to those tips we were talking about, first, breathe. Take a breath. Slow down, because remember that process. I'm just going to go up to the top here that we were, sorry, it's just taking me a while to scroll up here. So that space between the stimulus and the response. So we want to create that space. So if you can, take a breath. If you need to, give yourself a timeout. If it's a more heavy topic, you want to make sure location, right? Some conversations you don't want to have with other people around, right? Other times you might want to have, depending on who you're having this conversation with, you might feel safer and you might need to have it in a more public location. I would check in again with yourself after you breathe, after you pause, and say, why do I want to have this conversation? That will let you know your mindset. If you check in with your body and your body is tight and there is a lot of energy around it, maybe right now is not the time. because we can feel when we go in to a communication, conversation, dialogue, we know when we tune in with our bodies and our thoughts and our feelings and all the sensations, if I'm going in open or closed. If I'm going in closed, if I'm going in armored up, defensive, that is not going to work out well. So take a breath, pause, check in with your body, check in with your thoughts, check in with your feelings. I'm not saying you're not going to feel hurt. I'm not going to say you're not feeling defensive. If we can go into this space between stimulus and response versus react, we want to respond versus react, then we can move into a place where we can still set boundaries and be open to have the conversation. Someone else said, I lose patience when communicating with someone who isn't hearing, and I feel like a drill sergeant. So they're not, when they aren't hearing. So I would get curious about what you're trying to have them hear, because hearing and responding with, so I can hear a person and choose not to do what they're asking of me. It doesn't mean I didn't hear them, but you may not get the outcome you want. You know, a child that says, I want to stay up later. I don't want to have a curfew. I hear that, and the curfew still stands. So in terms of hearing, I'm curious about that statement, whether it's about hearing versus you're not seeing the reaction or the response you want, because those things can be different. Well, someone else said, thank you for this. Thanks so much for this. I missed the last webinar, sadly. You can go back and watch it. It's recorded. We have the link. These will all be available for you always, so you can go back and watch and listen as many times as you need to. The next one, just as we're wrapping up, the next one is going to be May 16th, and actually Janine, our dietitian, is going to be, I feel like a news broadcaster, and Janine is going to be with you that day, presenting on nutrition. So I hope you can tune in then. June 27th is the next one after that, and I will be presenting on hope. So I've really enjoyed tonight. Thank you for all your questions and comments. So helpful, so interactive. Please email, let us know how this was for you, any suggestions, comments. We are working on the technology so that you can see my face as we do this. But thank you again. I hope you all have a great night and a wonderful Easter weekend. Okay? Take care. Bye.